You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and we have a pseudo Jeffrey Epstein case that broke in Brooklyn, New York this week. A wealthy financier and his beautiful personal assistant charged with sex trafficking and transporting women in interstate commerce. And this wealthy financier was partaking in his disgusting scheme. So who is this guy? 70-year-old Howard Rubin. Rubin was of privileged means. He grew up in the 60s in Massachusetts, the son of a researcher for Polaroid. He earned his bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from Lafayette College and then obtained his MBA from Harvard. Rubin got his big break on Wall Street in the early 80s as a bond trader for Salomon Brothers. See, Rubin can crunch numbers in his head, and he became an expert at predicting behavioral patterns in the mortgage repayment realm. In his first year on Wall Street, it has been reported that he earned $25 million. You guys, this is 1983. He was rolling in it. From there, he worked his way through some big-name companies, Merrill Lynch, Bear Stearns, and finally, Soros Fund Management. And Rubin, like many high rollers, had a personal life that on the surface matched the image he was trying to portray. In 1985, he married a woman named Mary, who also worked on Wall Street. They had 3 kids together. They owned several luxury properties, including a co-op on the Upper East Side and a $9 million waterfront property in the Hamptons. And that marriage lasted for 36 years. But it wasn't all fancy Christmas card photos and day yacht trips. Rubin, while making millions, was also allegedly committing crimes. In 2017, several women, some of them former Playboy models, filed civil lawsuits against Rubin alleging that he had subjected them to horrific abuse, including beatings, sexually assaulting them, and non-consensual BDSM acts. Rubin said it was all contractual and that he paid the women. Those lawsuits were settled, and Rubin was forced to pay out millions to these women. But those were civil lawsuits. On September 26th, the Eastern District of New York unsealed a 10-count indictment accusing the retired financier of sex trafficking with a, to just be honest, violent undertone. Rubin was arrested in Connecticut, and authorities said he didn't act alone. His personal assistant, Jennifer Powers, was arrested in Texas. Now I'm going to read straight from the indictment that was filed by attorney Joseph Nocella. It reads as follows. For many years, Howard Rubin and Jennifer Powers allegedly spent at least $1 million to finance the commercial sexual torture of multiple women, all of this via a national trafficking network. The defendants allegedly exploited Rubin's status to ensnare their prospective victims and force them to endure unthinkable physical trauma before silencing any outcries with threats of legal recourse. It's alleged Rubin directed a sex trafficking enterprise, exploiting women who were transported from across the country to his Manhattan penthouse that was equipped with a soundproof sex room filled with BDSM equipment, including a device used to shock the women. This was not a one-man show. While Rubin dehumanized these women with abhorrent sexual acts, Powers is alleged to have run the day-to-day operations of the enterprise and got paid generously for her efforts. IRS, CI, and FBI partnered to see fit that all the facts are detailed in this case and ensure that this pair realizes the full consequences of their ghastly behaviors. Wow, they did not hold back in that indictment. This indictment lists that Jennifer Powers became his personal assistant in 2011. She was his scheduler, his hostess, his eraser. She directed the cleanup after the fact. The acts are alleged to, at first, have happened in high-end hotel suites in New York City, but eventually they took place in a penthouse in Midtown Manhattan. They made the switch to the penthouse because that allegedly allowed them to convert one of the bedrooms into a, quote, sex dungeon. The room was painted red, it was soundproofed, and it was furnished with BDSM equipment and devices that included a device to shock or electrocute those women. Rubin allegedly expanded his operation to Las Vegas in 2018, and occasionally he committed the assaults in that city. What did Jennifer get out of this? Well, one thing, a luxury property in Texas that authorities say Reuben falsely told a bank he was not embroiled in litigation, and that bank believed him, so they established the loan for the property. However, he was hip deep in the civil suits at the time, so he lied. And the indictment goes on to say that Reuben and Powers, together with others, recruited women to engage in commercial sex acts with Reuben. Powers frequently arranged the women's flights to New York to either LaGuardia or John F. Kennedy International Airports, and then transported those women to the penthouse. During many of these encounters, Reuben brutalized women's bodies, causing them to fear for their safety or resulting in significant pain and injuries. As further alleged in the indictment, Reuben and Powers required the women to sign non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, which purported to require the women to assume the risk of the hazards and injury of the BDSM encounters with Reuben. It also prohibited the disclosure of information about the BDSM sex with Reuben, and then it required the payment of damages in the event of a breach. Well, Reuben used those NDAs to threaten the women with legal consequences and public shaming if they sought legal recourse. After the sexual encounters, Reuben or Jennifer Powers, they used Reuben's money to pay the women by wire transfer or a payment service like PayPal or Venmo. At times, Jennifer Powers structured the payments to avoid sending a single transaction of $10,000 or more, this to avoid triggering reporting obligations by the bank. Now, the indictment alleges the defendants spent at least $1 million of Reuben's money operating and maintaining the trafficking network. If the two are convicted of the charges, they could face a maximum sentence of life in prison. Now, the minimum sentence would be 15 years. Just a quick reminder, Reuben is 70 and Powers is 45 years old. Now, Reuben, who is being held without bail, has pleaded not guilty to the charges. In previous court filings, Reuben has stated that the women were, quote, just prostitutes, and that they were not forced. He claims he paid them for their services. He also refers to the acts as, quote, rough sex and nothing more. Now, as a reminder, those rough acts included probing with pool cues, beatings with closed fists, and abuse that left the women unconscious. Jennifer Powers has been released in Texas on bond and is slated to travel to New York City for a preliminary hearing. Now, Reuben, of course, will ask for release pending his bail assignment, but prosecutors have already said they feel Reuben is a flight risk and should be held without bail. When I checked with my trusty little assistant known as ChatGPT, some issues with the case or potential hiccups might be better phrasing, meaning some of these charges have some issues with the way that they were filed. These charges stem back to 2009. So there are potential statute of limitation issues unless the federal prosecutors can prove that the charges aren't individual, that this was a continuance of one big crime ring. And then Jennifer will most likely try to sever herself from Reuben, possibly creating distance, setting up a defense of she was acting as an employee and as an employee only. Now, if these charges do make it to trial, we can expect a trial lasting several weeks. Let me know what you think in the comments. Are there too many similarities with Epstein? For me, one big difference, this case does not seem like Reuben was gathering dirt or intel on others. He just seems to be satisfying his own disgusting desires. But that could change when evidence is revealed. Let me know what you think in the comments. And of course, I need to bring you an update to the yogurt shop murders from Texas in 1991. The brutal murders of 4 young girls in a strip mall area of Austin have been covered extensively. We've got documentaries, HBO, podcast after podcast, really good local detailed coverage. In this podcast, I will give a summarized version with the update, and that update is a significant one. On a Friday evening in December of 1991, firefighters in Austin forced their way into the burning storefront of I Can't Believe It's Yogurt. Now, if you were alive in 1991, the name of the store totally makes sense. Although frozen yogurt was developed in the 1970s in New England, individual frozen yogurt shops were just kind of becoming a thing in the late 80s and early 90s. It was kind of the newest version of ice cream. As firefighters began working their way through the thinning smoke, they came upon 4 dead teenage girls. 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison and her sister, 15-year-old Sarah Harbison, and their friends, 17-year-old Eliza Thomas and 13-year-old Amy Ayers. The 4 girls were bound, assaulted, and shot. All of the abuse prior to the arson of the yogurt shop. The crime scene was charred, waterlogged, and almost entirely without trace evidence. The 2 older girls, Eliza and Sarah, worked at the storefront on West Anderson Lane in North Austin. Sarah and her friend Amy had stopped by the shop just to snag a ride with Jennifer once the shop was all closed up for the night. Now, the details from the night are based off customer eyewitness accounts and sales in the register. At about 1 hour before closing time, so roughly 10 p.m., a man entered the shop and asked to use the public restroom, which was located in the back of the store. Where he ended up, or how long he was in the store, are up for debate. I mean, it's been up for debate for decades. Then at about 10:50, so just 10 minutes before the store closes, a couple who had been enjoying a date night said they left the store, and when they exited, they noticed 2 men at a table kind of acting a little weird. Then around midnight, a patrolman was just working near the area when he saw the flames and called in first responders to extinguish the blaze. When firefighters found the 4 girls, they were naked, 3 of them gagged and bound with their own underwear. All 4 girls had been shot in their heads, execution style. Sarah, Eliza, and Jennifer, so the 3 bound and gagged with their underwear, were found in the supply room together. Amy was in a separate part of the shop, and she was not burned as badly as her friends, and she had 2 bullet wounds to her head. She also had a sock-like cloth tied around her neck. For the next 34 years, suspects were blamed. Suspects confessed. Suspects were tried and convicted and then released with overturned verdicts. And then some of those suspects were ruled out with the advancement of DNA testing. It's tangled, but let me give you the Cliff Notes version. Quickly in the early days of the investigation, a 15-year-old boy was caught with a gun that matched the caliber of weapon that was used in the murders. There was actually 2 weapons used, a .22 caliber weapon and a .380 caliber pistol. This young boy had committed a crime just days after the murder using the same type of gun in a location very close to the yogurt shop. He was questioned extensively. His answers even seemed promising to detectives, but eventually those detectives felt his answers were designed to maybe lessen his charges, like he was possibly trying to cast suspicion elsewhere. And when they checked into the 3 friends that this young man was implicating in the whole thing, well, it just didn't match up for detectives. All 4 boys were under 17 years old, and that wasn't tracking. Years ticked by, tips flooded in, but still no arrests were made in the quadruple homicide. Then in 1999, 8 years after the loss of the 4 young girls, fresh eyes examined the case, and that new detective looked at those 4 young men again. By now, they were in their 20s, and several interrogation interviews were reconducted with Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Wellborn. After many hours of interviews, Robert and Michael confessed. Now, we've seen this before. After hours of interrogation, false confessions can happen. And eventually, Michael and Robert said that is exactly what had occurred. One of the problems in this potentially coerced confession is these men had been interviewed as teenagers, and it was unclear how many details of the murders had been shared with or possibly fed to the suspects 8 years prior. Like, for example, if the detectives had not released information to the public about, say, that evidence of the sock-like fabric around Amy's neck, but they had mentioned something to the suspects years ago, and then those suspects bring it up 8 years later, but that evidence is still not publicized, that is going to make them look guilty. But we don't know how they got it. They might have been fed the information. Well, Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott were sent to trial. And in 2001, Robert was found guilty of murdering the 4 young girls. He was sentenced to death row. In 2002, Michael was found guilty as well, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Age was the only thing that spared Michael of an execution date because he was only 15 years old when the murders occurred. And at that time in Texas, a 15-year-old could not be sentenced to death. Now, the separate convictions had some problems. See, prosecutors had used the 2 men against each other. In Robert's trial, Michael's incriminating interviews were used to secure a conviction, and in Michael's trial, Robert's incriminating interviews were used to secure the other conviction. However, each man didn't get a chance to have any cross-examination of those interrogation interviews. This tactic violated the 6th Amendment, and in 2009, the convictions were overturned, therefore freeing the men from prison. At the time, the prosecution insisted that these men would be retried for the murders, but near the same time, new DNA testing advancements resulted in the men being ruled out as suspects. As the years marched on, memorials on the December anniversary happened nearly every year at the strip mall where the yogurt shop was located. And although many continued to believe the 4 men were guilty, no additional evidence implicated them further, and no retrial ever happened. Then, last week, those advancements in DNA testing and also advancements in ballistic matching paid off, and a suspect has been identified in the yogurt shop killings. And that suspect had been stopped at a Border Patrol checkpoint just 2 days after the murders. Authorities were that close to having their suspect 34 years ago. That man, Robert Eugene Brashers, had a violent history that left one sheriff in Missouri back in 2018 calling Brashers a, quote, serial rapist and a serial killer, and some of the violence occurred before the yogurt shop murders in 1991. Okay, let's get into it. Back in 1990, in Greenville, South Carolina, Genevieve Zitricki was beaten and strangled in her bathtub. Jenny, as she was called, lived by herself and worked as a computer programmer in the Michelin headquarters. She lived in a professional apartment complex. She was active in city softball leagues and also in teaching youth in the school system. Jenny's murderer broke into her apartment through the back door. He sexually assaulted her, then bludgeoned her to death. Jenny's case went unsolved for 28 years until in 2018, DNA linked Robert Brashers to Jenny's rape, torture, and murder. So his first recorded victim was in 1990 that we got with DNA. He had others, but the first one we got with DNA was in 1990. His next established victim was in 1997 in Memphis, Tennessee. In this case, Brashers approached a door to a home. When the door was opened, Brashers forced his way inside and sexually assaulted a 14-year-old girl. The following year, Brashers pulled double duty one night, committing 2 crimes all in a span of about 3 hours. First, Brashers broke into the home of Sherry and Megan Shear, their mother and daughter. Brashers murdered both women after sexually assaulting the daughter. 2.5 hours later, Brashers again tried to force his way into a home under the guise of needing directions. When the woman in the home resisted, Brashers pulled a gun and fired a shot at the woman. He then fled, but he left behind a breathing witness who supplied a fairly accurate sketch of the man, and also he left behind ballistic evidence. Brashers had prior convictions for violent crimes before DNA and ballistics linked him to the crimes I just mentioned. So these are the crimes that I mentioned that we didn't connect Brashers to via DNA. All right, so now to the update. In June of this year, Austin cold case detective Daniel Jackson resubmitted to a federal system ballistics findings on a shell casing from a .380 caliber handgun. That shell casing evidence was taken from the yogurt shop murders back in 1991, and he got a hit. The shell casing came back to a match of an unsolved Kentucky murder. Now, that case hasn't been talked about much, except to say the case has many similarities to the yogurt shop murders. Still, back in June, this means you now just have 2 unsolved cases with a common thread of a specific gun. But then in August, South Carolina officials told Austin detectives that advanced DNA tests on a sample taken from under Amy Ayer's fingernails back in 1991, well, that sample came back as a match to Brasher's DNA from the South Carolina murder. So, where's Brasher's? Well, back in 1999, after a police chase, Brasher's enacted his own death penalty by committing suicide. Now, this trail of crimes had me thinking. This guy was everywhere. South Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri, back to Tennessee, back to Kentucky. And then, in the middle of all of that, he found himself in Austin, Texas at the yogurt shop. And his previous convictions for violent acts had him in Georgia and Florida. He was a true nomad, which makes for a difficult trail to follow when trying to find a serial killer. And remember the stop in El Paso that happened just 2 days after the yogurt shop murders? During that stop, Brasher's was driving a truck that had been stolen from Georgia. Brasher's fled cops before he was stopped, and when the stolen truck was searched, police found a .380 caliber gun. Of course, police confiscated the gun. But when Brasher's father bailed him out, police returned the gun to Brasher's dad. And his dad likely turned around and gave the gun right back to Brasher's. By the way, the gun Brasher's used to kill himself, it is believed to be the same .380 caliber handgun that was used in all of these murders. Now, the yogurt shop murders is not case closed. Police are trying to tie Brasher's to Austin, and they're asking for any help from the public. He is listed as a suspect right now. Now, they're very, very confident and they have evidence, but they want more. Police do believe that Brasher's acted alone in the murders of the 4 young girls. Some of the attorneys for the 4 accused and the 2 wrongly convicted men did speak out this week, noting the long, hard battle for justice. They said the men deserve full exoneration. Now, both Barbara Wilson, she's the Harrison sisters' mother, and then Sonora Thomas, that's the sister of Eliza. Well, they both said this was never about vengeance. They just wanted the truth after 34 years. Thankfully, DNA and ballistics brought peace in this case. Now to Florida, where the bizarre gets even more bizarre. I swear I could start a podcast just on Florida cases alone. Anyway, in this case, 61-year-old Craig Voigt left a letter in his neighbor's mailbox. The letter described how Craig had decapitated, bled out, and cooked his pet peacocks. He even described the frying pan he used. Why would he write this letter? Because the neighbor was feeding the pet peacocks, and that made Craig mad. So to get back at his neighbor for overstepping her bounds, he killed the birds and cooked them. Craig was arrested and charged with aggravated cruelty to animals causing excessive pain or death. This is a 3rd-degree felony under Florida law. When Craig was arrested, he allegedly told deputies that he had killed the peacocks out of spite and that when he gets out of jail, he plans on killing the remaining birds located on his property. He reasoned that only he should be allowed to care for them. Now, when I took the podcast to production, Craig was still in jail, and his neighbor has filed for and was granted a protective order against Craig. I could not find in any source material if Animal Services has rescued the remaining peacocks. Heavens, let's hope so. And Florida, you just keep bringing the new and the bizarre every single time. And finally, because it has been a podcast with animal cruelty, BDSM, and 34 years of pain for surviving family members, let's finish with something just a little bit lighter. First off, I'm not really a candy girl. Peyton and Garrett love sour candies, things like peach rings. Like you might have seen Peyton put up on her stories how much she loves peach rings. Or like they also love Sour Patch Kids. I'll get those for Garrett when I'm trying to buy him a treat. Now, my other kids, they love chocolate, but it's just not my thing. I don't like candy and I don't really love chocolate that much. And it's been this way forever. I didn't really like it when I was a little kid. You can give me a cinnamon roll or a donut over chocolate and I'm gonna love you for that. But if I was gonna choose candy, so if I'm gonna choose one, it would be Reese's. and specifically the holiday Reese's. I have a weird reason why. I like more peanut butter than chocolate as a ratio. So my favorite is the Easter eggs that they put out at Easter time, the Reese's eggs. There seems to be more peanut butter. Then my next favorite is the jack-o'-lanterns or the footballs, then the Christmas trees. My last favorite is the peanut butter cups because for me, there's just too much chocolate. Now, I'm sure I'm going to get hate for that because there's a lot of people who think there's never enough chocolate. But I'm telling you all of this because Hershey, the parent company and the makers of Reese's, received a treat instead of a trick last week when a judge dismissed a lawsuit claiming the company's Reese's candies pulled a fast one on customers by depicting spooky Halloween designs on their packaging for the jack-o'-lantern Reese's. But when customers unwrapped the candies, the pumpkins were featureless. According to CBS News, U.S. District Judge Melissa Damian ruled on Friday that the consumers who filed the class action lawsuit failed to show that the lack of confectionery details on the chocolate and peanut butter candies, such as missing mouths and eyes on the jack-o'-lanterns or ghosts or other Halloween theme figures, well, they were saying that had caused them economic harm. Damian pointed out that while the consumers may have been disappointed by the chocolate's unwrapped appearances, the candies were not so flawed as to render them worthless. In other words, the chocolate still tasted like chocolate, and even if they weren't as haunting as the purchasers had expected from the packaging, it didn't cause them economic harm. They ate them. Now, the original lawsuit was filed in 2024, and it claimed a form of deceptive advertising. But the judge was like, hey, they still ate exactly the same, so you weren't harmed. Sorry. Now, the attorney for the consumers told CBS News that they are going to change the wording of the lawsuit and refile it. He said he felt that Hershey's should not be awarded with sales when the attorney claims they falsely represent main characteristics of jack-o'-lanterns or white chocolate ghosts. Apparently, this is a thing with Reese's. Some people have complained that when they bought the football-themed Reese's, which are awesome because there's more peanut butter, but when they bought those football-themed Reese's, they didn't look any different than the eggs at Easter time. All right, weigh in here. Do you think the judge was right to dismiss for no economic harm? Or do you think it was deceptive? If they refile, do they have a case? And you can go ahead and tell me, am I crazy for wanting more peanut butter in my Reese's ratio? Sound off in the comments. And since I just said sound off in the comments, let's talk about it because Monday's episode, wow, you guys had things to say. Especially my YouTube listeners, they went hard in the comments section. So let's dive in. I was corrected a few times on my pronunciation of Aiden Carney's last name. It's totally fair. Almost all of my research is in written form. So although it looks like it should be pronounced Kearney, it's Carney. Noted. There's a reason I do almost all reading research. Newscasts that last 90 seconds don't give me the details I need, and quite often they're wrong because they're put out so quickly. I almost exclusively read everything. I'm sorry. I will get it right the next time I talk about Turtle Boy because we're going to talk about it again. Now, let's get to Turtle Boy himself. Some of y'all acted like I took a stance on his reporting. Listen to the podcast again. I did not. Turtle Boy is provocative. It's part of his brand. That's not me saying it's right or wrong or good or bad. It's reading the way he behaves and how he chooses to make a difference. Second, half of the podcast was spent talking about other corruption in Massachusetts law enforcement agencies, not just the Karen Reed case. And I credited Turtle Boy for exposing that corruption. Yet some listeners are so hung up on the Karen Reed case, they will just attack no matter what. I have covered Karen's case multiple times. And when I said that the listeners are divided about 50-50 on her guilt, I'm interpreting comments and DMs. I didn't declare that the jury got it right or got it wrong. So calling me a stupid lady because you think everyone believes exactly like you? Well, that's truly stupid. I love your passion for the truth. But when we hurl insults, it destroys what we're all working toward, which is justice for victims and especially protection for children. Now, during the reporting on Turtle Boy, I referenced the witness intimidation that occurred outside of the restaurant owned by a member of the Albert family. I'll be honest with you guys, I didn't realize there was another crime wrapped up in that. Thanks for telling me there was another murder. It is just one more aspect that I can dive into to report on the corruption because I'm going to report on Turtle Boy again. Now to the comments that were constructive. Call Me MJ said her grandfather was a Massachusetts state trooper, and if he had heard about all this corruption, he would have been rolling over in his grave. And then Heidi said, there is more corruption and gave me another case to look into, so I will definitely follow up on that. Raul brought up an excellent point about the overtime scandal. He said there's a now and later portion of this. Those scamming the system get paid out initially, and then their pension is based on overall money made, so they get a later benefit also. That's an excellent point. And then April reminded us that many law enforcement agencies are understaffed, and so the overtime is legit in lots of cases, but when it's abused the way it was in Massachusetts, then it's truly morally vacant. Bottom line here, John O'Keefe's family deserves to find the killer of their loved one. I hope the investigation is continuing, and I hope they truly find the murderer. All right, that's your Thursday episode of Rise in Crime. Thank you for being here. Even when you give me a hard time, I ask for you guys to comment, so I'm willing to take it. So thank you for being here. Please share this episode with a friend, or maybe even the other one that caused such a stir. Go ahead and share whichever one you love the most and you felt so passionate about. It does help the podcast grow, and I truly appreciate it. I do have a cache of cases that you guys have sent me. Some of those I mentioned in the comments here. I'm looking into those, and I'm specifically going to be looking into the potential of a serial killer in Houston. So I'm covering that one as well. I feel like that's kind of being diminished by the regular media, so it's a little hard. I'm trying to find stuff on it. Please leave a 5-star review or a positive comment. You can leave the negative ones too. Just be gentle. Go ahead and leave comments. That does help all of the algorithms and everything, so that would be great. Also, 5-star reviews are welcome to all the Oh No Media podcasts. That's Murder with My Husband, Into the Dark, and Rise in Crime. You can join me again on Monday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.